Huples Cat. All the COVID related news on June the 21st. Happy Father's Day to those people out there that have got the responsibility of being a father. And I have a great show for you today. You'll enjoy this. I think you'll get something out of it. First off, because nobody ever watches the whole video, this is a medical mask. If you're going to buy surgical masks, do not buy medical masks. This is the mask that we're using for our patients and visitors that is substandard and has failed, so we're not using it for staff. So just a quick video to show you something I was faced with at work on nights. The level 3 ICU, trauma ICU, called me. They have 2 patients with COVID in a room and they were worried about this. They saw this on the floor and they weren't sure what it was from, so they looked and they realized it was the tubing from a negative pressure machine to the external vent, which meant that the negative pressure machine was just recirculating air back into the room, sucking it in and pushing it back into the room. Now, because it was a double room and they're both temporary negative pressure machines, the other negative pressure machine was working. Now, I would have been strongly tempted to kick up a huge fuss about it, but it had happened early on the day shift. And what staggered me was that the nurse looking after the patient without negative pressure on his side, when I questioned him about it, did anybody tell you about this? Yeah, they mentioned it in report. Okay, I said, looking at him, wondering why he's earning nearly $50 an hour Canadian. What are they doing about it? Oh, I don't know. So that's the level of responsibility that shows me that that person's not a very good nurse, right? Take responsibility. The bed's not been cleaned properly. Find out why. Kick up a fuss to the right people. Get it fixed. But it does show an overall attitude that's developing at work of complacency. And one of the main reasons for complacency is we don't know anybody personally that's died from it recently or got it recently, apart from an outbreak last week on one of the medical floors. And we are now pulling back. We are now closing our COVID floor and making it all medical again, and so we'll only have one COVID ICU that is approximately about 28 beds. That's still fairly full, but they're mostly PUI, persons under investigation. They came in with disease processes. We think they might have COVID. We can't rule it out, so we're treating them in case they have, waiting for accurate results. And again, if you get a negative COVID test but you have screaming symptoms of COVID, we are going to give treatment for COVID, which is supportive care, rather than just say, oh no, the test's negative, they're fine, because only 70% of the tests are accurate. So as I said in my hospital stores mini video I put up, we're running out of paper gown hats and plastic booties. They have a few, but they're really in short supply. Now, for some areas of hospital care, like specifically labour and delivery and the operating room, and for some ICU processes where it's effectively OR, we need them. So they've cut back on supplying most of the hospital with these because a lot of people were wearing the paper hats. You'll notice from this picture of me in the COVID room, I'm not wearing a paper hat, nor am I wearing the cloth hat I got. The reason is that I didn't need to, because no time was I within 2 meters of the patients. They were both ventilated and it was a closed circuit. They weren't being suctioned or had been recently suctioned, and I was only in the room for a limited amount of time. If this material was freely available, I would have used a paper hat, okay? As part of the restriction is that people like me are going to do things slightly more risky because we're aware of the fact that the stuff's in short supply. So we are getting alternative supplies like we have for everything. So the masks change, the hats change, the gowns change, the gloves change, the hand sanitizer changes, the soap changes. Our stores people do a phenomenal job in keeping us going. What they're not going to be able to do, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion, and it should not be generalized, is that we will not be able to provide PPE that's adequate to all staff if we have a second wave. Which brings me on to another point. This is still the first wave of COVID-19 disease caused from the SARS-CoV-2 virus. That's its name. Name things as they are. Don't make up names to trivialize or be racist, okay? So, the bottom line here is that if you are able to provide yourself with PPE in a reasonable legal manner, you should do so. You should do so today, or at least tomorrow. Specifically if you are a first responder, and that includes grocery store workers, don't rely, as I keep saying over and over, on your employer or your government providing you with PPE. That is not something prepper lifestyle would support. It's also not a very smart move, given the fact that almost 4 months into this, we in a major teaching hospital in Toronto have inadequate PPE and are handing out substandard medical masks to patients and visitors because we don't have enough surgical masks. So there's a thing called PTAC in Ontario, which is basically the provincial transport. So it came off from SARS in 2003. So anybody going from a hospital to a nursing home or vice versa, or hospital to hospital, has to have information put online so we can track spread of disease. Makes sense. We've been doing this since 2003. So I just want to show you this because they've just again changed the screening criteria to red flag COVID. So it's always worth watching and seeing what the cutting edge of infection control is in your local area. As you can see, there's 5 questions, but there's actually multiple questions within each question for most of them. So the concern would be an outbreak in the facility. Obviously we're going to treat them as a PUI even if they have a negative result. Even if they're waiting for a negative result. If you get a negative result when you're in an outbreak facility, we're still probably going to treat you as PUI. So this is what they're doing. And it's interesting here, the actual facility staff have to be asked this question, not the patient, and that's kind of new for us. Travel outside of Canada. Anybody traveling outside of Canada is an idiot, but there you go, there are people out there that are dumb enough to go on holiday right now. Has the person tested positive for COVID-19 or had a close contact with a confirmed case of COVID-19 without wearing appropriate PPE? This really bothers me. What they mean here is close contact using a surgical mask, not an N95. I'm really bothered about this, but I guess they have to have some criteria to give the impression that the PPE they're using in nursing homes and hospitals is safe. These are the current symptoms: fever, new onset cough, chronic worsening cough, shortness of breath, difficulty breathing, sore throat, difficulty swallowing, decrease or loss of sense of taste or smell, chills, headaches, unexplained fatigue, malaise, muscle aches, myalgias, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, pink eye, conjunctivitis, or runny nose and nasal congestion without any other known cause. The 5th one is interesting. Are they over 70 years or older? Are they having the following symptoms: delirium, unexplained increased number of falls, acute functional decline, or worsening chronic conditions? The answer yes to all of these questions has been associated with positive COVID-19 results, which is why they're being asked, which is why it keeps getting updated, because we keep finding out new stuff. And it's really interesting that it's not what people think it is. It's not just like, oh, you've got this and you can do a temperature check and you don't have a cough, you're completely fine. Not necessarily. Now the other good news, in my opinion, is way overdue, is we're allowing students, nurses, physiotherapists, respiratory therapists, medical students, pharmacy students, occupational students, physio students, it goes on and on and on. There's lots of careers. A lot of them were almost completed their last and final clinical when they were thrown out of all the hospitals and nursing care facilities. So we're allowing them back selectively in July, so they'll have a concentrated term between July and August. Now this is one of the major reasons I'm not teaching right now, other than the fact I don't want to get exposed to my students. Children and young adults are terribly bad at following directions, I find, like very old people. And I didn't want to catch it, so I'm doing what I can not to catch it. So it's going to be fun to see the students come back into practice. I think most of them will be on day shift initially, but I will encounter them on nights. I imagine a lot of them are going to have very mixed feelings about this. I'm wondering how supported they are, given the fact that schools of nursing like York University have not had teachers like me for a year because of various issues, and there's a lot of people working there who actually really don't have any ICU or any particular infection prevention disease control. It'll be interesting to see what these poor students faced with when they come out onto nights. Now I don't want to attack President Trump because, let's face it, what's the point? At this point he's completely, unless you're blind, made a fool of himself, and terrible fool. But I will throw up a couple of clips. He made what he claims is a joke about not testing, and he's said this before in a way that wasn't a joke, so I'll put both those clips up so you can see what he actually said last night and what he said in the past.
Again, our testing is so far advanced, it's so much bigger and better than any other country that we're going to have more cases. We're always going to have more cases, and as I said this morning, that's probably the downside of having good testing, is you find a lot of cases that other countries who don't even test don't have. If you don't test, you don't have any cases. If we stop testing right now, we'd have very few cases, if any. We will show more cases when other countries have far more cases than we do. They just don't talk about it. But the testing, on the other hand, is very good because we find out where it's going, how it's going, who it's going to, and we take care of it. People say, don't do it. Don't do it. We saved hundreds of thousands of lives And all we do is get hit on like we're terrible. And what we've done with the ventilators and with the medical equipment and with testing, testing is a double-edged sword. We've tested now 25 million people. It's probably 20 million people more than anybody else. Germany's done a lot. South Korea's done a lot. They called me, they said, the job you're doing, here's the bad part. When you do testing to that extent, you're going to find more people, you're going to find more cases. So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please. They test and they test. We got tests that people don't know what's going on. We got tests. We got another one over here. The young man's 10 years old. He's got the sniffles. He'll recover in about 15 minutes. That's a case. Add him to it. That's a case.
To emphasize the point, if you look at the number of deaths that have been diagnosed with COVID-19 in the United States of America, if they hadn't tested anybody, all of those people would still have died. So I'm not quite sure what his point is. He is of course clinically correct that if you test everybody in the population every day, every single new case will be found. But how dare he trivialize a 15-minute sniffle in a 10-year-old as being nothing? Does he not understand aerosol and infection and transmission at this point? It's June 21st. Take it seriously, Mr. President, if you watch my video, because it's not a joke and it is not a political issue. It is not that you wear a mask if you're a Liberal and you don't if you're RNC. If you've got that mindset, and some people I know have that mindset, you're really daft. Please wear a mask in public when you're close to people to prevent you infecting them. And if everybody else is wearing a mask, you're protected. And because most people aren't taking it seriously, wear an N95. That's my advice. So let's have a look at the first wave. This is from, of course, Johns Hopkins University site. It shows the death rates and it shows a lot of other things. It's an interesting site to look at, to keep an eye on what's going on, but what's going on in no way should depend upon what you're doing. You're locked down until it's over, as far as you can. If you have to work, you work safely. If you have to shop, you shop safely. If you have to entertain like I'm going to do today, you have to do so safely. But if you look at the curve, the global curve of deaths, there is no way this is the end of the first wave. It's a clear and classic first wave phenomena, blunted on the upswing, kept artificially down by lockdown. Humans infect other humans. You stop humans getting together, you stop infection. When they get back together again, the infection continues onwards. Beijing is finding this out. It's not a second wave in Beijing, it's the first wave. They stopped it. They stopped all infection for weeks. And now they're having to lock down again. This is a really interesting thing. Most of our industrial production comes from China. Most of it comes from India. Both of those countries are having really serious problems maintaining normalcy in the face of a global pandemic. No surprise. Where they've gone, we will follow. America is showing rising cases in numerous states. The death rate still remains appalling. Everybody, including the President of the United States, needs to take this seriously and do whatever's rational and sane to limit the number of people who die. It doesn't matter whether he thinks it's only people older than him. It isn't. The average age of death still remains about 55. Half of them are under 55, half of them are over 55. By a slight fraction, the majority of people who die from COVID-19 have no comorbidities. Children are showing more and more bizarre signs, in tiny numbers thankfully. Who knows if that will continue or not. It's not something to mess around with, it's not something to trivialize. Just going to finish off with a couple of charts from my workplace, and not for reproduction please. This shows the number of PUI, people who come in with COVID symptoms or suspicion of COVID because they come from an outbreak place. And you can see that over time it's continuing to drop. The next one is actually much more significant. These are the number of cases who are confirmed COVID, who are admitted patients at my facility. As you can see, we have crushed the curve, we have flattened it, and we have pushed it down. What's going to be interesting is when we stop lockdown, will this stay flat? Will it rise a bit? Or will it take off? What I'm seeing in China, what I'm seeing around the world, what I showed you from the Johns Hopkins global infection rate, is that we are near the top, but maybe not over the top, of the first wave. If we have subsequent waves, that's going to be bad. But even if we don't, and we probably will, but if we don't, the bottom line is, so we crushed the curve, we flattened the curve, we benched the curve and we've pushed cases down. By good due diligence of the majority of the population, human-to-human transmissions basically stopped weeks ago, and what we're seeing over the last week or two is a huge reduction in actual positive patients in my one facility, my hospital. It's a big one, and it is in Toronto, which remains under lockdown, whereas other areas of the province are open. What remains to be seen is what happens 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 weeks after lockdown ends. Beijing certainly suggests, South Korea suggests that we are still in wave 1 and we're about there. So we've done this in Toronto. When we stop lockdown, we will see a peak. We don't have adequate PPE. We really don't. We have much less now than we did when we were expecting the surge. Certainly we have a lot less variety, and one size does not fit all when it comes to an N95. So stay frosty, stay happy, be careful out there. Don't stop washing your hands. Don't stop wearing masks in public. No matter what everybody else is doing, you're not a lemming, you're a Huples kitten. Meow! Toodles.
Together, we're making a difference to stop the spread of COVID-19. As businesses reopen, practice physical distancing, and wear face coverings where distancing is a challenge. To find out more, visit ontario.ca/coronavirus.
Meow! Huples cat. All my local Toronto Newmarket news on COVID on June the 20th. Or is it the 19th? No, it's the 21st. This has been a 2020 great, beautiful, nice cat production.